Resident Evil's infamous action era began with the extremely high regarded Resident Evil 4 in 2005 and ended with the horrible Umbrella Corps in 2016. Instead of staying true to the original survival horror roots the series was known for, they strayed away further with every new entry during that time. The games became more and more messy and tried to appeal to the more casual gaming audience with less horror, more action, QTEs, linear level design, the almost complete removal of puzzles and more. In my opinion, this was a very bad time for both Resident Evil and the whole horror genre in general. But nonetheless, not everything was bad and there are reasons why you should give these games a fair chance, even if you're only here for the proper survival horror. So here are all the reasons why the action era of Resident Evil is actually underappreciated. Unsurprisingly, considering the games were supposed to appeal to a more casual audience, the games offer arguably the most casual fun experience of all Resident Evil titles. In contrast to the survival horror focused games that rely heavily on resource management, these offer fairly brainless and simple action. Run around, shoot enemies, collect loot and repeat. This is especially fun because most games during that era have great and satisfying gameplay that doesn't take itself too seriously. Resident Evil 4 gives the enemies very obvious weak points and projects the attacks of them greatly due to the animations, making the gameplay incredibly intuitive, fun and satisfying. Although it's not realistic in any way. Even though other Resident Evils, like 5 and 6, were worse in this aspect, this still remained a trait for the series during these years. I would also argue that these aspects make them a bit less stressful, making long play sessions easier. Most of the non-action Resident Evil games are actually pretty scary and unnerving, at least for less desensitized players that aren't used to them like us proper survival horror players, and can get exhausting after some time, considering they're just much more stressful and scary. At the same time, the lack of save items, like the ink ribbons, and the inclusion of autosaves make it easier to just dive in for short sessions. Some of the older games almost force you to potentially much longer sessions because you don't have any ink ribbons, aren't near a typewriter, or lost a lot of progress due to the lack of autosaves. Apart from that, the addition of co-op in most of the games is great for a more casual experience. It's even less scary, you can spend time with your friends, if you have any, and in the end, every game is more fun in co-op. Although Capcom enjoyed co-op probably even more than the players, considering it boosted the sales massively. Just like Capcom strayed away from the survival horror, I'm going to stray away from the gameplay for now. So another reason are the stories of the games. Resident Evil 4 was arguably a bit disappointing, considering they just killed off Umbrella like it's nothing, and almost fully disconnected the game from what came previously, although it's still fun and entertaining. But especially the following games continued the story of the OG cast and included interesting new characters. Resident Evil 5 continued and finished the Wesker and Chris storyline with a great and Resident Evil-like ending, while also having a good partner in the form of Shiva. Although we won't talk about her AI. And a good secondary villain with Excella. We also get a continuation of Jill's story and some backstory in the Lost in Nightmares DLC. Resident Evil 6 story is pretty controversial, but it's still pretty cool to finally see characters like Chris and Leon meet up in person, the reunion with Sherry, more Ada, and Wesker's son. The Revelations games do a good job in bringing back old characters as well, like Chris, Jill, Barry and even Claire. Unfortunately, these suffered from weaker new characters though, like pretty much everyone from the first Revelations. So not only are they pretty important to the overall Resident Evil story, but also very entertaining. Many moments are completely ridiculous, both in the positive and negative sense, over the top and stupid, but at the same time no one can complain that they were bored. I like the story told in Resident Evil 7 and Village, but they are definitely less unique and arguably more predictable in comparison. I mean, Resident Evil 6 is a mess, but I would argue that it's full of surprises. Again, both in the positive and negative sense. And my YouTube analytics are also full of surprises, because according to them, a lot of you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, even though you watch the videos. So please do so if you want to support me. Thank you. And just like Capcom returned to the survival horror, we return to gameplay aspects. Even though I said that the gameplay mechanics appealed more to the casual audience, they are also incredibly varied and Capcom obviously wasn't afraid of experiments. Everything up to Resident Evil 4 was always fairly unspectacular. You had your tank controls, confirm and shoot button, similar inventories and in general fairly simple mechanics. The recent games since Resident Evil 7 feel and control very similar to each other as well and do nothing crazy. Well, and the action era games seem to try anything and feel nothing alike. Resident Evil 4 was still fairly simple and reminiscent of the previous games, then RE5 was an evolution of that with some new mechanics, like the inventory and partner controls, But Resident Evil 6 and the Revelations games feel completely different to literally everything other in the series, including each other. 6 introduces plenty of new combat mechanics, the possibility of walking while aiming, even crazier QTEs, weird vehicles, and feels very different in general. Revelations 1 had this weird scan mechanic and feels different due to being originally a 3DS game, and Revelations 2 feels different again with new mechanics and without the 3DS origin. It's honestly insane how they managed to make the same formula feel so different every time, with completely different controls and game-specific gimmicks. Apart from that, the more linear and set-piece focused style of the games, especially in Resident Evil 6, adds to that even more. There are just constantly new things happening. Just the first hour of Leon's campaign in Resident Evil 6 already features a slow horror focused section, multiple defense sections similar to the cabin in Resident Evil 4, a short car drive, avoiding trains, avoiding cars, like 10 different areas, a lot of action, and then there are like 19 chapters more. You can like these games or not, but no one can deny that there were plenty of unique and new ideas to somehow keep things exciting. I mean, not like my beloved survival horror gameplay wasn't exciting. During this time, Capcom also went pretty wild with both the character and enemy looks. No matter if we talk about being gruesome, iconic, or just ever so slightly sexualized. I think most of you would agree that the looks of the enemies and bosses are generally well done across the board. Revelations 1 is a bit weaker in my opinion, but they got the C thing going on, so there's that at least. But apart from that, I would even argue that they feature some of the scariest enemies in the whole series. They are the Regenerators, disgusting Plagas, some seriously plenty of dogs, plenty of insects, and bosses like Verdugo or Salazar. The character designs are just as good, and I would argue we got some of the most iconic outfits in the whole series. There's Cool Jacket Leon from Resident Evil 4, Buff Chris, Blonde Jill, Emo Leon, Shiny Stress Ada, Emo Wesker, and more. As well as plenty of amazing unlockable ones, like RPD Leon, plenty of fan service outfits, Armor Ashley, OG Claire, and so on. The designs are very much over the top at times, and I can imagine that there might have been slightly too much fan service for some, but I really appreciate how creative and bold they were. Especially considering that the recent games really didn't do all that much in this regard, apart from maybe the i2 and i4 remake if you're generous. My last point is simply the sheer amount of content and bonus modes. Resident Evil 4, 5 and 6 are easily the longest campaigns from all the mainline games, while both Revelations are also decently long. There's also plenty of possibilities for replays due to the ranking systems, unlockables, and the possibility to just replay certain chapters. And then there are also all the extra modes, like Mercenaries, Assignment Ada, Separate Ways, More Mercenaries vs. Lost in Nightmares, Desperate Escape, different online modes in Resident Evil 6, Raid Mode twice, and probably more I forgot. Especially Raid Mode, Lost in Nightmares, and Mercenaries are highly regarded as well, so it's not even like these were bad. The recent games have a decent amount of additional content as well, but nothing quite as enormous as what we've got during that era. Therefore, they are probably also the easiest Resident Evil games to dump a lot of hours into, simply because of all the extras. Although this obviously also depends on how much you enjoy certain modes. An honorable mention to all the memes that were born during that time, and the fact that especially i6 showed them how to not do it in the future. So what do you think about the action era of Resident Evil? Please let me know in the comments. Please also consider to subscribe, like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you and see you next time.